Welcome, Ava. Can't hear you.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right.
Yeah. Get the mic in the right spot.
Excellent. I'm surprised we don't have more yet, but it's not technically time yet, so
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll
So
we,
people
we may
trickle
see.
in, and it's the morning. It's early.
It's early. What are you talking about? It's 11 in the morning. What's the problem? You know, I feel I think most of the participants are U.S., so not so bad. I feel badly for somebody trying to dial in from Japan. It's always a problem time somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. It is the perpetual challenge of open source projects to find a time that works for everybody. It's not possible.
Oh, I don't think it's just open source projects.
Fair.
So I remember reading years ago, and this is a long time ago, so different circumstance, but IBM had intentionally stood up, uh, you know, a place in India, a place in the U.S., a place in Europe, and the goal was to make everything 24 hours. And this was early days doing this kind of thing, and they were encountering all sorts of challenges
A
trying to
lot of
do that.
the recommendations I give folks is build your teams around your time zones or build them to be completely asynchronous. Right? And you can scale a team without ever having a synchronous call.
Right.
It's a different process, though.
Yes, I prefer to try to keep things asynchronous because I can't. It's a challenge. Oh, you're in Japan and or Australia. You're in Europe. There is no good time.
Yeah, syncing global time zones and meetings is just, oh God, it is one of the
Well,
most difficult things.
well, it's not hard to explain them. It's just it's going to be an awful time for somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was managing a team in India for a while, a number of years ago, and it was like, yep, every 10:30 at night was my meeting time. It was 8:30 for them, so no one was happy.
Yeah, I led a group within the Open Document Standard, and we had a bunch of people from the U.S., a bunch of people from Europe, no problems, not big problems, and then folks from Japan and China were interested, and we very much want you to come. Boy, the time zones are getting harder now.
Yep, exactly.
Alrighty.
Share my screen here, or give everybody another minute or two.
I'm going to try to post the URL for the. Oh, whoops. Interesting. Okay, I am trying to admit people as I see them, but all other help appreciated.
Yeah, I've been admitting the ones that have been popping up. I don't think there's anybody waiting right now.
No, I don't see anyone waiting right now. And I see, well, somebody's screen.
Hopefully mine. and hopefully it's meeting notes.
It's your financial password, Liz. It's all right.
Ah, damn it again. Really secure password 123.
Hello.
We have a project working on this, by the way.
The anti-best practices working group.
I was thinking of the great MFA distribution project, but yes.
Yeah.
All right. I posted the link to the meeting notes. I would, if you would please add your names, just so we know who's here.
Hey, David, you're a little bit hard to hear. Can you
Oh,
fix the mic?
really?
Thanks, man.
Thank you. That's not something people tell me often.
Not right now.
All right, I think we've got all the pertinent people here to start this discussion at least. So, Dan, thank you for bringing this up. This has been intended to be the topic this week as well. So the elections, as we all know, we kind of put them off from what was supposed to be August, actually. And then with the formation of the new governing board, we kind of decided that, hey, let's go ahead and wait a little bit and see what happens there before we move on. Well, that time is now. We're here. We've got the new governing board in place. So I think we need to start wrapping this up. For those that remember, and I think Danny shared this over email, some of the decisions that we've made in the past already around structure and timing. But we also need to go ahead and decide some of this more specific details, such as what is the nomination process? Do people self-nominate? Can we nominate others? What does the tooling look like to do that? What do we want to use? And Jory and Brian, we're kind of looking to you guys for some support on this. I believe you've done some of this before. And so if you have existing tools that you're aware of, we'd love to lean on that. And so in addition to the nomination process, once we have that, we kind of also need to decide which seats are up for election right now in this first initial election. Given that the current TAC is bootstrapped, do we want all of the seats to be up? Do we want just the community seats or just the governing board seats to be up for election? Governing board seats right now could be tricky in my mind, given that the governing board's brand new and kind of just getting used to all this. So that's something to think about. And then in terms of the community seats, who exactly is defined as community and can therefore have a vote in this? And then again, the election tooling and site. So with that, do folks just want to open it up for a discussion as far as those topics? If there's other things you think that we also need to decide, and let's try to drill down into this in terms of all these little details. Let's say, Jory, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to say I really think that the election tools piece, those questions are perhaps like the easiest and most quickly addressable. So we use a wonderful tool at the LF called OpenVote. It provides everyone with a private ballot. We can't see how you vote or anything like that. We can just see that the qualified electors have received a ballot, that they've opened it, that they've begun the process, and that they did or did not submit a ballot. So it helps us very much kind of keep track of whether people are in fact engaging with the election process, but it does that in a way that's nice and secure and private to that person. From the standpoint of which ranking system to use, that's another common question. We highly recommend the Meek STV when you have a large group of potential candidates. You can, of course, with the tool, use a wide variety of other types of voting methods. I do strongly recommend that we don't go down that rabbit hole because it does tend to derail conversations. The Meek STV does let us choose a number of winners. Say, if you have 5 seats open and you have 10 candidates, you can easily run that sort of an election, and it produces an auditable report and that kind of thing. These are just a couple of the best practices. It's a great tool. I'd love to. We're using it currently for the general member representative election, and I'd love to just keep it simple and wash, rinse, repeat if we can do that.
Jory, I didn't hear the name of the system you were recommending. Can you repeat that so we can get that in the notes?
OpenVote, and I can I'll put a link.
Not open, OpenVote.
OpenVote, and I'll put a link to the website in the notes.
Oh, that sounds great. Is there any opposition to using that system? I definitely like the idea of using something that's already in use and continuing on with that and not complicating things.
Thumbs up on not complicating. And obviously we can use it And if there's a problem, if we don't like it in the future, we can use a different system later, but let's get started.
Absolutely.
What was that?
we do-
You said don't go down the rabbit hole. What did you suggest specifically? Just to
So in terms of there's multiple types of single transferable vote or plurality voting, and lots of
Right.
voting methodologies out there. And the civics nerds definitely love to go down those rabbit holes. Meeks STV is probably the most common, the most popular, and it definitely solves the problems of the types of elections we're going to run. So spell Meeks, MEEKS.
I just wanted to add from Hyperledger's experience, we had used a tool previously from Cornell called Sieves and had a lot of issues with it that had very little to do with the tool and everything to do with email deliverability. Although the nice thing about OpenVote is you can see who's voted, you can reissue their ballot to them. So if a ballot got lost in the spam filters, et cetera, you can also give them a link to be able to vote, I'm pretty sure. And that's still done in a blinded way that still protects the privacy of people's votes.
Yeah, and Ava mentioned as well that they've worked with ranked choice voting, and I've done that a bit in the past as well. I don't know, do other folks have experience with that? Do we have a preference about that?
That's actually, I think, what we did for the governing board election that just passed, and we used OpenVote to do it, and I thought it was very effective.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so it sounds like plan is let's go with OpenVote. We'll try ranked choice voting as well if that's possible in that tool. And then, like David mentioned, if there's any issues, we can adapt and overcome.
Yeah, I believe Meeks is a ranked voting system.
It is, yes.
Okay.
Now, can OpenVote, does it support the sort of nomination process as well? Or is it once we have candidates, we can go ahead and use it?
So it just works once we have candidates. That's, would be nice if there was some kind of candidate, form that we could send through that and then populate it, but it's just for the election itself.
Yeah, I think for the TAC, Jennifer, I see you have your hand raised.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to remember. I think when we initially bootstrapped the TAC, I think we just used Google Forms that people could kind of fill out their name and like a little bio sort of thing. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that correctly. So I don't know if we just want to do something simple like that again, kind of people put their name into a hat type thing, and then we can go ahead and use the OpenVote. Obviously open to suggestions if folks have other ideas.
Yeah, what I was going to say was on a similar line to that. So I know when we had discussed the TAC election, I think in the summer, we had talked about the idea of the governing board or the existing TAC nominating folks versus self-nomination. My huge vote would be for self-nomination, so we can really democratize the process and hopefully get new folks that may not be as visible that we don't know yet running for the TAC elections as well.
I'm fine with all that. Just to go back to the actual voting tool, something that's come to mind. Does it support weighted votes, or is it just a single vote? So can somebody say, this will be my first choice, this will be my second choice?
Yes.
Yeah, that's ranked voting. Yes.
That is
is.
ranked choice. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what we're describing.
Yes. By the way, you mean Meek STV, correct, Jory?
Correct. And I popped a link to that in the notes as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But, as I think our note also pointed out, I think that the big challenge is not necessarily like, how do we collect the people who want to come and participate, but how do we identify the electors, like who is eligible to receive a ballot and cast a ballot? That's probably the bigger question.
That is the question I was also about to raise.
Sorry, could you repeat that question one more time? My audio just broke up on me.
The question is, how do we identify the eligible voters for this election?
Yes, exactly.
I'd be inclined to do it on contributions. At least, they've made some level of contribution. How we measure that, I'm not entirely sure, but
yeah, it invites the question: how do we define a contribution at this phase of the OpenSSF?
Well, if I mean, one approach is basically everybody who has either submitted a contribution, heck, even allowed an issue or a change on a Google Doc.
Yeah, we discussed this months ago. Oh, apologies. Jennifer, is that you?
One thing we could do is have kind of an opt-in where maybe we have like a Google form or something if you are interested in voting. And when you submit, you give like, I don't know, your name, your org, your email, and then you specify in a free text form what your contributions have been, or at least some, to identify eligibility. And I imagine that that's probably enough of a filter function that we will probably get like reasonable candidates putting themselves forward as having contributed.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable too. Like,
that sounds fair.
It's easy to validate that, and because I don't think we're going to get 50 people self-nominating, hopefully. And I know we talked about this months ago when we first had these conversations. Somebody had mentioned a tool that they had that could kind of analyze some of this stuff automatically at one point. But I think at least for this initial one, just to kind of get things moving, Jennifer, what you suggested is perfect.
Yeah, just because I'm thinking like sometimes the contributions will show up on GitHub, but sometimes they'll be in Google Docs, or sometimes they're more bureaucratic in nature, shall we say. So keeping it as open as possible to let people, self-nominate and opt in as to what counts as a contribution feels right at this stage of how we organize.
Agreed. Yeah, and I know we talked about, especially with OpenSSF, where all contributions, like you mentioned, are not necessarily code or even documents. There could be someone from the community that just has a really valuable opinion that we want to have around, right? And that's a contribution in a lot of ways, especially at this stage. And so we certainly wouldn't want to exclude anybody in that regard. So
agree. And it also saves the case where somebody makes a single capitalization change just to get a pull request in, or
right.
Flooded with commas and periods and little changes in the repos.
Although if you make fit 5,000 of them and they're actually good, I might think about it. Because some people, oh my, they need help.
David,
formatting helps a lot.
Wait for my 5,000 pull requests.
Oh,
I don't regret ever saying it.
All right. Okay. Now this is to vote on the membership of the TAC. Okay, right? Who would we send these emails to? Or maybe we should create a little email address for the purpose or something?
Oh, I thought we were going to do like a Google form or something like that.
Okay. Okay, so I wrote down email, but really is it email in or Google form? Okay.
I think that's what we did last time, so I'm just kind of throwing back to that. But
Jory, I think we have something like that. Jory or Brian, you may know offhand something that already has that mechanism, or maybe OpenVote has such a mechanism already available in it.
So there's two ways you can do, two primary ways you can do voting. You can either email, you can provide a list of emails addresses, and that's your list of eligible voters. And then the OpenVote system sends out periodic reminders and tracks all that. The other is through a code system where you provide unique links and codes to eligible voters. One plus side of that is that you don't necessarily have to have the eligible voters' email address. But downside is you can't say that they didn't just turn it over and hand it to somebody else who's not eligible.
Right. But how do we to vote? Okay, that's fine for that part. The question is, how do we handle the people who say, "Hey, I want to vote. I want to vote on TAC membership."
Yeah, Yeah, so for that, I would say, a Google form seems perfectly sufficient, especially if you want to mirror that process in terms of gathering nominations. Let's keep it, like with like. Here is the Google form to nominate yourself. Here is the Google form to nominate yourself as a voter. Seems quite easy.
Okay.
Easy.
I can give a precedent, which is I linked the Knative steering committee elections process, in which people who are not listed through other data, so they didn't show up in GitHub or they didn't show up in a document, that sort of thing, can ask the election officers to be included as eligible voters. And the election officers can say yes or no, and they record that decision in a log that's available publicly. So for example, well, I can give an example. There was an election last year, during which time I had not, so to speak, contributed to Knative, but I had written a book about it. So it was felt that I was an eligible voter on that occasion. I'm not saying you have to write a book to be eligible. I'm just trying to say that there were other kinds of contributions that don't show up in the statistics. So there needs to be a trapdoor, and I think that was a reasonable process for it.
So I'm going to suggest that the self-nomination process for seats be a mailing list so that it is publicly visible with a declared time window. Right? The election officials should announce when the nomination process opens, how to nominate with a very, clearly described, here's the subject line in your email. You must include this information if you're nominating yourself for a seat. And here's when that nomination period closes. That is all public. The identification process for who the electorate is, right, who gets a vote in that, I think that should be semi-private. I think a Google form is great. Again, the election official names need to be public information so that it's not just a form to a black hole. And then I completely agree with, whoever was just speaking before me, that there are a lot of types of contributions that may not be traceable back to GitHub or Google Docs that still ought to qualify someone for having a vote because they've been participating. Perhaps they've only been helping to run meetings. There's lots of other ways that people have been involved and could be involved. And that's the kind of information that ought to be sent into the election officials so that they can verify it without sending it publicly to a mailing list.
Okay.
Really
That makes sense. I think we could have a Google form to intake, but I do agree with you that the self-nomination for becoming a member of the TAC should be public. We could repost on the mailing list, or just ask people just post on the mailing list and skip the Google Docs step for Google Form step.
Yeah, for the self-nomination to be elected, right, to run for a seat, I don't think a Google form is useful for that. I think mailing list with a standard template, the election officials announce the template and the timeline. And for what it's worth, the process I'm describing has been used by both OpenStack and Kubernetes for well over a decade now.
Yeah.
So I know we can reinvent things and tweak them as we need to, but it works pretty well.
Yeah, I prefer not to reinvent, tweak for sure. Yeah, if we need to. So yeah, I'm all in favor of kind of leaning on these other things that already exist. This sounds great. I think the thing that we kind of need to decide right now is the election officials. Who are they? And kind of go from there.
Yep. Election officials and the timeline.
Yeah.
Election officials. Sorry. Election officials, timeline, and maybe what we're looking to have candidates submit. I would love if we could have a candidate statement. I think sometimes a biography can just lead to a snowballing of power and prestige. I would love to hear from candidates, their views on OpenSSF or on open source security, or some ideas of what they might like to contribute, or what they've contributed thus far, or what they're excited about. So if maybe in whatever form, or whatever we're collecting from each self-nominated candidate for the TAC vote, if we could give them a space to give a bit of a candidate statement in case they want to communicate anything with us, with the electorate rather.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Is it common in other orgs that, I'm assuming no, but to have the election officials be members of the the body that's being elected?
It is very
No,
common.
I prefer that they're separate.
That's what it seems like a conflict. Yeah, potentially.
It is very common because the election officials are often required to validate the candidate's eligibility for candidacy.
Yeah, I could see how that would be necessary.
Yeah.
Because my initial thought was, well, let's have Jory and Brian if they're up for it. That's the easy answer, right? But then at the same time, they may need some help in validating the qualifications of some of these if it's not obvious. Right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the conflict of interest issues are more easily handled, and this kind of riffs on what Ava just said earlier about trying to make a lot of things public. As long as things are done publicly, a lot of those issues I think are less like, particularly if there's some questions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'll second David's point. That was really seconding mine to say this is part of why who the officials are should be public. The timeline should be public. The requirements or eligibility for running for a seat should be public. The self-nominations should be public, but any sort of endorsements or naysaying, like don't criticize in public, like discourage commentary on people's candidacy. There are a couple foundations I've worked with where discussion around like what is someone's platform, what do they want to achieve, yields healthy results, but for the most part, I haven't seen that turn out well.
Yeah, I could see that. So how about this? We go with the Google form. People self-nominate with that. Once we have define the timeline. Once self-nomination is done, we then publish the list in our repo, either as a doc or as an issue or something. However we want to do that. So
Sorry, Ryan, that's not what I suggested.
Oh, sorry.
I was suggesting Google form is only used for the electorate saying, hey, I think I should get a vote in this, but that the candidates for the seats use an email template to the TAC mailing list.
Oh, I'm sorry, apologize. I misunderstood you.
Okay. I'll give the notes a pass over to see if they're in line with what I've been suggesting.
To give an alternative model, again, going back to Knative, which I keep returning to because one, I'm familiar with it, and two, I'm familiar with the extremely painful process of the birth of that particular mechanism. There was a great deal of stem and throng. The thing that they do instead is that the list of candidates is submitted through pull requests against the community repo. So for each election, there's a directory, and that directory includes a series of files for each of the candidates, which are created by pull request, and that's how you submit your nomination. That works.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
It's our way. I'm not
I
sort of
personally
like
try to avoid email just because we get so much email, and plus the mailing lists tend to go to my junk folder, it seems, for some reason randomly.
I do my best to do email because trying to log on to 3,000 systems is complete insanity.
That's fair as well. Yeah.
Oh look, I have 8 million Slack channels on multiple different worksheets, and then we have Discord and Discourse and this and that, and I don't have that many tabs.
My fan is always going very loud because of all the different chat programs. One thing I would request, so whether we choose to use pull requests or an email list or whatever to collect the candidate statements or candidate profiles or whatever we want to call it, it would be great if when we send out the actual voting link, we have one compiled place where you can look at all of the statements. So there's no like recency kind of priming effects for those of us who would quickly forget what they read if they didn't have it all in front of them. We did in the governing board general election vote, this was done really well. There was a list of candidate statements linked from OpenVote where we could view them all at once right before voting. I would suggest that we do something like that again so that we have them all at our fingertips.
So how many seats are we? Yeah.
And I've just, if you scroll up a bit, I've captured that in the doc. Yep, right there.
Okay. Yeah.
So how many seats are we talking about? I think originally there were seats for each working group, but it sounds like we're talking about more of a general election. Is
So
that
at last time that we discussed this, we had all kind of agreed that it was 7 seats total. That would be the TAC, 4 would be community, 3 would be governing board. So the question now is, are we going to vote for all of them right now in this election, or are we wanting to split them out for governing board and community? Because one of the things that we also agreed to is that we would have 2-year terms alternating each year, voting for governing board seats and then community seats, so that we would maintain continuity of the TAC across votes.
Was that just discussed or was it agreed to?
It was agreed to. We have it in the GitHub issue, and it's in the document as well.
I'd still seen it as discussed. Wasn't clear to me I'd reached closure, which is fine.
Yeah, we actually then submitted it to the governing board for review some months ago as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
How would we determine who is, if we're keeping 4 on and 3 voted out, or vice versa, how would we determine who of the present TAC stays?
Exactly. That's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the messy question I was
I think that
slowly
might be,
building up to.
that might be where a complete refresh is easier.
Also, if you alternate between the governing board swapping its 3 and the community swapping its 4 every other year, that means that effectively the community only has input once every 2 years.
Yep. I would not recommend that.
Right.
Is there any drawback to doing a complete reset right now, other than the risk of not having continuity?
I think that's the only risk, and I think we could also, kind of de-risk that a little bit by saying, okay, we flip everybody. If everybody goes, or more than 90% or something goes, would some folks be willing to kind of linger on, at least to help with the transition, for a month or 2, or that kind of thing, just to make sure that it all goes smoothly.
Another sort of hybrid choice would be pick 1 or 2 of the governing board seats, have those stay on since those are appointed anyway. Let the governing board, go pick those 2 and then elect the other 5 or 6 seats. Now that guarantees at least 1 or 2 seats of continuity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Arno, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to share, a little bit of experience on the Hyperledger side, because in Hyperledger, the TSC, we go through a full re-election every year. And, it was one of my concerns that we may not have enough overlap and continuity. But in practice, this has never been the case. We have a few seats that get changed every year, which is great. So honestly, I wouldn't be too concerned by that. Even though in theory it's possible, but
Or no, can you also share the take? Because one thing I think Hyperledger does different is it has a rather large TSC. And could you speak to the advantages or disadvantages of that?
Yeah, in fact, we have even made it larger. I think for the last 2 years, we have now 15 seats. And the advantage, in practice, we had, just like you have now, very, open, TSC where everybody was welcome to join and participate. And so I think having more people officially has allowed us to have broader scope and point of views. And we have more diversity in the representation. Both like socially, genders, geography, but also people from the different projects across the organization. So I haven't seen any drawbacks really in having, made it larger rather than smaller. We started with, I think, 11 and went to 15.
I realize this is reopening, but I do like this idea of having more seats. OpenSSF's gotten a lot bigger.
Yeah, you could rotate 7 every year then. So 7 come on to join the existing TAC. Next year, the existing TAC members would rotate out. The 7 that have come on for this period would continue, and you've got kind of a way of you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Then you don't have to have people self-elect to leave, okay? And you can do a refresh, but then there's still some folks around for context for the new folks that join. So not a bad idea.
I really like that idea as well.
There are potential drawbacks to having a very large TAC. OpenStack at one point had 11 and then 13 and then 15. And it was only very briefly that large. It became much more difficult to get consensus and get decisions made at a large size when there were contentious decisions, which at that point in the project's history was every meeting.
And that's exactly the discussion that we had when we decided on 7, because we did discuss having larger, and we felt that smaller would be better for now, at least for execution.
This is a thing that I wish more foundations, more projects were comfortable flexing, adapting as needs the time of a given group's decision-making process. So I would leave that open to discussion if adding more seats right now is the right choice, or are we just slapping a Band-Aid and avoiding a hard decision of who stays and who goes.
I suppose that might depend on that is also the mechanism by which we make decisions. So whether or not we require full consensus, if there's a majority vote, we might also want to think of what we set quorum to be. And I imagine that some of those procedural things would determine whether this would become a lot of overhead and not worth it, or if we could manage it in a way that we ensured that if we did have this larger TAC, that there was full participation, people were showing up, taking it seriously, casting votes and moving at a good clip. I wonder, if what we really desired was to have a larger TAC, if we could create kind of the rules of engagement in such a way that we mitigate hopefully many of these challenges of having a larger group.
I think there are advantages, as mentioned, the diversity of having more people and different viewpoints and perspectives is definitely useful, and I know that's something we valued in OpenSSF from the beginning. But we have to balance it, right? And I think the other concern too is saying, do we add more, and then we decide that it's a problem? It's a lot more difficult, I think, to shrink it back, right, than it is to add folks. But we did talk about adding more in the future. I just don't know if that time is now, if that's the right thing, or just to keep it stable, as it were. But then, Raul made a very good point. These meetings are open, right? Most of the people involved right now in this discussion are not, quote, official TAC representatives, right? And clearly it's working. So it really just comes down to the formality of voting, I suppose, and the questions of what comes with that.
And
Brian,
adding a bit again from the Hyperledger experience, if you are coming down to a vote, of a 4-3 vote, you're doing it wrong, right? Consensus is, that doesn't mean there weren't a lot of votes in Hyperledger that were contentious, that there were always votes, or quite frequently votes, where people abstained or voted against, and yet they still passed. And that's actually good to show. I think, that you're actually taking some risks here and there. But I think in practice, it's worth it to have one that can represent all sides of a community, or as many sides of those as can be. The one other thing I also wanted to add, again, I know we're talking about a bunch of variables at once, but I think having the governing board appoint a set of representatives is interesting. It's not something I've seen on other projects, except in a bootstrap kind of phase, where at the beginning of a project, the initial funders, put somebody on the technical board just to get things going, right? Certainly happy to keep it here. I think the governing board will like to see that. Although asking 20 different organizations to agree on 3 or even any N technical reps is not a process I look forward to. But I think one thing that matters is whether people envision that happening before, concurrent to, or after the general election, because I imagine many of the people the governing board might find suitable to appoint would also be people who would otherwise run.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. So now I think what we kind of need to decide, are we wanting to increase the TAC size right now, or keep it at the risk of unwinding previous decisions, or do we want to continue making progress, leave it at 7? We always have the option to add more in the future if we decide that's necessary. What are folks' thoughts on that?
Maybe we could run very quickly right now through some of the points for and against. I guess some of the points for having a larger TAC would be, as our node had suggested, a greater diversity of geographies and of people and of companies and of backgrounds is very powerful. Another argument in favor, I would say, kind of builds off Rao's point of, a lot of people attend anyway. I guess my question would be, well, why not have them if they're, committed and present and active members? Why not have more voting members of the TAC? Another argument, I suppose, in favor of a larger TAC is, given that we are in a time of huge growth for OpenSSF, like incredible investment, incredible range of organizations joining us. There's probably a lot of decisions to be made, but also there's probably a decent need for continuity given that most of the governing board has been entirely refreshed. The model that we're proposing does allow us to have some continuity from the existing TAC into the future. And as OpenSSF goes, that's really the only elected members or bootstrap members at all that can carry on. So there is that benefit of having some of the older perspectives come through into this newer, larger, more powerful group.
The con that I noted and I wrote down here is it can be harder to make decisions. I don't know if there's other cons that we want to identify. Oh, for a variety of reasons. Okay.
I'm going to jump in to note that it's about 40 past and we have 2 other items on the agenda. I'm not sure whether we want to continue with those today or not.
Agreed. Yeah, I was going to mention this because while I do definitely want to discuss those other 2 topics, I feel this conversation is important to get resolved. So I'd like to hear if other people agree, if they want to take this conversation offline and try to solve it there, or do we want to just dedicate this meeting to solving this election process that has been a little delayed?
Yeah, we've got a lot of open questions here, so we could run to the end, but we're still not going to have resolved it. So I recommend breaking these out into GitHub issue discussions.
Okay, that sounds good.
The next 2 items I'm hoping are very important, but I'm hoping won't take too long, in part because I think most people have already been made aware of them. That's SIG-Store and the working group rename.
Agreed. Yeah. So just to kind of summarize, and actually just I was about to say what Phil just commented. Let's take kind of where we're at right now, which sounds like we're saying self-nomination over email with statements. Let's document this. And then some of the open questions are around growing the TAC into what size, and then whether we're going to, it kind of sounds like the general agreement right now is to hold the election for everybody and not do a split. If anybody disagrees with that assertion, please tell me. But again, let's just put each one of these somewhat open items into these GitHub issues and we'll have the discussion there and then move on. No disagreements? All good? Okay. In that case, let's move on to these other 2 topics. And if we have extra time, we can come back and keep discussing the election process as well. So the next one up, I believe, is SIG-Store.
Yes.
All right, Luke, Dan, you guys want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I mean, most of the information is there. I'm figuring folks had a chance to read the issue on the OpenSSF GitHub TAC repo. But what we would like to request is that SIG-Store join the OpenSSF as a project, okay? And so this would be a standalone project. What are some of the other key points? There's some reasons why we think a standalone project is more suitable. Okay, so we're kind of pretty much modeling this off of what Alpha Omega has done, because we come with our own existing community, our own repositories, Slack channels, and so forth. Okay, and we also have our own level of funding that's already in place. So a project is definitely a better fit for us, really. So this is really to sort of for the TAC to vote if they think technically, so somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, technically that SIG-Store is a good fit for the OpenSSF. if that is the case, then this will then go to the GB for them to look at.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this would be the proposal is to make it as a project as a sibling with the working groups and with Alpha Omega, with the rationale listed below that, you know, because it's big, it makes sense to have as its own thing, which I'm supportive of, by the way.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. Basically, a peer of Alpha Omega, kind of a similar type process of running.
Right.
Yeah.
The other key aspect as well is we're running a public, we will be sort of launching into a full productionized public service as well. So, I mean, I believe a WG is more around solving problems, whereas, you know, we're actually sort of, we've defined our problem and we've got a public service to run. So with SigStore, you get the community. Okay, there's an existing community with something like just getting close to 400 contributors, 20 different organizations. And then there is the public service, which will be the funded part of SigStore, where we effectively pay for the staffing and resourcing to run the service.
And then, so we have this in a GitHub issue already that you've created. So I think what we need now is just to have TAC reps go ahead, look at that, read through it, give the thumbs up if you approve. And once it's approved, we take it to the governing board. Excuse me, to the governing board.
Is there any reason we can't just do that now? Because this has been discussed for some time. I mean, if we want to do it on the GitHub on GitHub issue asynchronously, that's fine. But if we're all here and it's all done and we're all okay, then should we just do it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, we can. Yeah,
that. Unless somebody said, like, I really need more time to think about this. But if not, why don't we vote now so they can get it ready for the GB?
Process thing. Why would this go to the GB? I thought the TAC kind of had full oversight on projects coming in.
The TAC does have oversight, right? Improving technical strategy and alignment and that kind of thing, but we still inform the GB. And then I think there are also potential budgetary concern or issues that may come up that they need to be aware of, but it's not taking them to approve.
Right. Yeah, it's the governing board approves basically us as staff, kind of overseeing the operational side of this, kind of acting as the folks to collect the money, disperse the money as well, and all the kinds of things that the governing board oversees when they come to us as staff, right? But that is that alone isn't enough. It has to also be a worthy project from a technical point of view, and that's the tax role.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, this is the final vote, right?
This vote happens, if it's positive, then it would go to the governing board at their next meeting, which will be in December. If they approve it, and then from that point forward, we can consider it an OpenSSF project.
I'm not quite sure I understand why that second step is actually necessary from the charter.
So this could be an unfunded technical project under one of the working groups, right? And that could be an acceptable status for something that comes through the TAC. Not everything that comes through the TAC has to be governing board approved, of course. Only those things that have budget and operational implications.
But I think in this case, there is an expectation that there's going to be funding. And in fact, I think a lot of governing board members are expecting to fund this. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, some of them already are.
Right. So I think because we know that there's going to be a funding request, let's raise that up now. I think it'll be viewed quite positively, actually. In fact, I'm pretty sure it will. But so since we know that's going to be coming on, let's make sure the governing board knows right away, and and if nothing else, sound them out, because I think we will be asking for funding in that area, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's really a process question. I just want to make sure we have this correct. Are we giving them a heads up? Are we asking them to vote? If so, what part of the charter is that kind of going along with?
Let's see. The governing board wouldn't want to approve a project unless the TAC had discussed it first. That was made clear at the last governing board meeting, actually. And so that's why this precedes the governing board conversation. Not because the charter logs in a specific process for this.
Right. So just to be very clear, if the TAC approves it, it can move underneath OpenSSF and now becomes a part of OpenSSF. It still goes to the governing board and they are purely voting on the funding side of it. Is that an accurate overview?
Because we're expecting that there will be additional funding needs, and that's okay.
And voting on the funding, it also is about that funding getting the oversight and the involvement of us as OpenSSF staff and the Linux Foundation in its collection and dispersion. And because that creates obligations and risk, that's why it's a governing board level vote.
Makes sense.
Maybe we should follow up offline. I'm still not understanding. Like, we don't actually have a funding request yet to vote on or approve. So I'm not sure what the governing board would be voting on. Like, let's say they said no for some reason. Like, I don't actually think that's within their, I don't like it.
Sure.
I'm kind of playing
No, that's
devil's
fine.
advocate here. So I don't actually think the charter says they can say no to projects joining the OpenSSF.
Well, and certainly if we bring something to them as a proposal in good faith, we have to be have some plan B if they said no. I mean, the plan B, it would be that this would could continue as a technical project at OpenSSF, but the funding for it and the operations would be handled or managed elsewhere. You know, some other type of organization, whether another LF org or even completely outside LF.
Ava, you have your hand raised?
Just a point of comparison, since we've been sharing comparables a bunch in this meeting, the CNCF does not have any such process. The governing board there does not get a vote. It is the TAC's purview to approve and promote or graduate projects only. So
yeah, and that's what I read on the charter itself here as well.
And to be clear, the governing board is not approving this as a technical project. You know, this could be launched entirely as a technical project where the repos were under our GitHub organization, you know, whatever policies we have around CLAs and DCOs and that kind of thing, we'd apply. All that could exist without the involvement of a fund, without collecting funds, dispersing funds, all that kind of stuff. It's if we want that second piece to come under the OpenSSF organization that the governing board would need to approve that.
Just to share for what it's worth, and I know a lot has changed, so I don't know exactly how relevant what I'm about to say is, but we did do an exercise last year, a series of offsites where we were looking at OpenSSF decision making. And we were pretty specific about where different decisions were made. And when we went through that exercise, we did decide that whether a specific project or working group were to join OpenSSF would be under the authority of the TAC, and then the governing board would be informed. So it did seem that the intention, at least originally for us, was that the TAC would make these decisions. But of course, things may have changed, and we can maybe talk about this separately if interested. But where we were standing, at least as of last year, was the intention would be that the TAC would be the ones to decide whether or not a project is joining OpenSSF.
Yep, and this is aligned.
Ryan, could I ask for clarification on something you said a minute ago? You said if it's purely a technical project, you felt that that's in the TAC's purview, but the second part, and I wasn't sure what you meant by the second part or second piece. Could you clarify that?
The funding piece, where you know something like SigStore, it has an operational component where you have to keep live servers running, where there's potentially staff to handle support. You know, something that looks a little bit more like Let's Encrypt, where ISRG, you know, has a DevOps kind of role in keeping the things running. That's where it involves something that you need to have under a budget kind of authority. Now, there'll be places where I think there's budget funds, as those of you who are at the governing board meeting saw me put, you know, line items against things that the working groups are working against that it won't require additional governing board approval once we get the budget approved next month. So that's all in addition. This is just, this is something that's just like Alpha Omega. You know, if you want the Linux Foundation and OpenSSF to take on kind of the operational responsibility for collecting and dispersing funds, managing to a budget plan and an operations plan, and having staff, you know, and having people that we pay, that's something the governing board needs to approve.
Thank you for the clarification. I think I just missed that. What you were referring to, I understand all of those points. And for comparison from other foundations, what I would say is what I've seen foundations do is when the technical advisory council feels a project is well within their scope, well aligned, there's a lot of interest there, the TAC approves it, and then the financial aspects of that, those do still need to get worked out, and that becomes the a process worked out between the TAC liaison to the governing board to say, hey, we have approved this. This is now part of the foundation. We need to work through the process of how we're going to fund this. And those are two different discussions.
Yeah, and that's exactly the process that we're going through right now, right? I think that's what this is. So we're trying to approve it at the technical level, and then the approval that the governing board provides is purely financial.
I think the wrinkle here is that it's already funded.
It does complicate it, yes.
Right.
Right. Like
Right.
they've already taken funds from donors for a purpose. That there needs to be some assurance that that purpose is not upset, because not to go back to my law student days, you've got something that looks and smells very much like a trust to me. And there might be terms that modify that, and I'm full of shit, but to me it has the vibe, which means that if the funds were taken to be spent on SigStore, they can only be spent on SigStore. They can't be repurposed by the governing board. So there is a complication there potentially. And I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice.
Yeah, so my kind of naive take maybe on what would happen here is the TAC would vote and we would approve starting as a project, and then at some point later we would come up with some kind of budget request, SigStore would decide how much funding they need for what, and then that would be a separate vote for the governing board.
That's correct.
On an actual funding request, not on like an abstract joining.
Yeah,
thing.
that's what I understand.
Yep. So with all that said, shall we hold a technical acceptance vote?
Let's go.
And defer
Let's do
budget?
it.
Any dissenting vote, or anyone that does not want this to happen? Anyone that would like to wait to make their vote decision? Okay, I think in the absence of deferment and the absence of any negative votes, I think that is approved.
I would love to just hear the yays.
Would anybody like to confirm their vote of approval?
Yay.
There we go.
Pretty obvious for me, isn't it? So
Yes, sir. Yeah,
and
I don't have a vote, but I'll say yay anyway.
All right, well, that is officially approved. Welcome to OpenSSF.
Hey.
It's exciting.
Yay.
It's nice to see things grow, get more
Yeah.
community. It's really awesome.
Yeah,
So
and I think a lot of us are very excited.
absolutely.
This is a truly different approach to a perennial problem.
Yeah, and so to clarify next steps, to present this to the governing board, which I believe falls on me. So I think questions that will be asked are about budget. So Luke and Dan, I don't know if you guys have things like that already going, but let's sync up and get something formal put together that we can actually present to them. And
Sure.
start working through that
worth
process.
including Brian as well, because although Brian's not on the TAC, he needs to consider the staffing.
Yeah, whoever needs to be involved. Yeah,
and
that was-
operational service. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can make a heads up here, the governing board wants to have a starting budget within the next 3 weeks. They've already got a early draft of that, but I would not be surprised if SigStore would like additional funding than in addition to the funding they've already raised. I know you've already raised some,
Sure.
but if there's additional funding that would help accelerate things, I guess Luke, I'm kind of looking to you especially, but Dan, whoever, make a pitch and what it would be used for. I think it would be received extremely favorably, and really now the iron is hot. Now is the time to hit it.
Understood.
All right, so with that, we have 4 minutes left. Kay, I know you have one more thing. I think this will be fairly quick to discuss around the recently renamed, rechartered digital identity attestation working group, which I'm happy the name has changed because now I can pronounce it better.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. I've been sitting here quietly all meeting. This is kind of a change for me. I'm very excited about SigStore. So I just, wanted to mention to this group that the Digital Identity Attestation Working Group did approve rename rescope to Supply Chain Integrity Working Group in the last meeting. So I think the next steps are just help from Jory, probably to rename the working group, update the calendar invite, some of those administrative things. I think that we also do need to change the existing README page and probably rescope the charter. I don't know, do we want the TAC to approve? I know we want the working group to approve a new charter and a new README page. Do we want the TAC to approve that as well?
I think what we've done in the past with the TAC, it's not so much like we approved the working group and kind of the direction, and then the other working groups, what they did was provide their charter just sort of as an update to the TAC, but it was, we could provide commentary on it, but it wasn't necessarily like, oh yes, that's okay, you can do work now type of approval. It was just more of an informational, I believe. So.
Okay, well, we'll try to in the next Supply Chain Integrity Working Group review an updated charter and then share that back with the TAC in the following TAC meeting.
Awesome, that sounds good.
Okay, Brian, Brian Baylendorf, you have a hand up. I don't know if that's left over or.
Yeah, I think it was
that's vestigial. I can do it.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, we
All
have
right,
work to do on the voting stuff. I guess we're going to have a GitHub issue to resolve that. And
I think we're gonna have
Ryan, are you going to try to
GitHub
lead
issues.
wrapping that up? Sorry.
Yeah, I'll take the notes. Ava, thank you for putting the notes in there that you did with the summary. That's very helpful. Yeah, I'll split those into multiple GitHub issues so each one can be a discussion and approved. I'll work on that probably today, actually.
Yeah, we need this resolved in the next 2 weeks or so, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is urgent. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the time is now. So yeah, I will get that going. I'll send out emails. So everybody please participate. Thank you very much for today. I really appreciate the great discussion that we had. We're making progress. We'll get there. So look for those emails and I will see you guys in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thank you.
Ryan, thanks
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.